For today's main program, I'm pleased to welcome to the podium your VP of Programs this year, Beth Knox, to introduce our main speaker. And I'll just slip in, Ralph, I checked my ancestry and they revised me. I'm now 31% on your team. Beth, over to you.
Thanks, Jeff. It's my pleasure to do the introduction today for our speaker. Ralph Munro is a retired Republican politician who served as the 13th Secretary of State of Washington. Beginning in 1980, he served as our Secretary of State for 5 terms. He was born in Seattle and grew up on Bainbridge Island. He's a graduate of Western Washington University with a BA in Education and Political Science. Now, his first job with the state was as a supply clerk working in the basement of the Capitol building. Following that, Governor Daniel Evans appointed Ralph as the state's first volunteer coordinator in 1969. Now, flash forward today, he's going to share his candid and personal views on the role of democracy in our country and the transition of our national leadership to a new administration. Please welcome Ralph Munro.
Well, thank you very much. And before I start, I just want to compliment Seattle Rotary for weathering the storm and sticking in there and keeping going. I don't know how many of you saw the Rotary magazine yesterday, but came in our mail yesterday. But it's amazing that to read where we are with polio. And can you all hear me okay? Okay. And where we are with polio, and Seattle Rotary played a major role in that, along with a lot of other clubs around America. What I do mostly now for Rotary, after serving as your president, and we're back here living on the farm in Olympia, I serve on the National Task Force for Polio Eradication, and we work with Congress. So there's 6 of us that work with members of Congress to make sure that we can continue to have the support we need, especially for the very most difficult problem that we have, and that's Pakistan and Afghanistan. And that's our job. We go to Washington, D.C. probably once a year, maybe twice a year, and then we conduct our business by Zoom, just like you do. And we've been very fortunate. The Rotary budget is really not a controversial budget, and we've had good success with the United States Congress in the minimal requests that we have. So congratulations, Seattle, for you. You've got a lot going for you, and you always have had, and you still do. And it's really really fun to be invited back. And I wish we were all together in the hotel ballroom in person, but we're not. So we'll just have to work our way through all this, and hopefully it'll be over soon. So to President Jeff, thank you for the nice words. To Governor Kathy, I hope I can meet the expectations of your request. Bon voyage to Mariah, and welcome to Fiona. It's going to be more great opportunities ahead. And thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. As I said, and I'll say it again, Seattle, Florida is still the finest Rotary club in the world, and you continue to set a leading example for Rotarians around the globe. I may disappoint some of you today. I didn't come to make partisan comments or accusations. I will not be criticizing any of our national or state leaders, and I will try my best to follow the Rotary 4-way test. Over the past year, 2020, like many of you, I have certainly had my personal ups and downs. I saw very encouraging times, and I saw incidents, like I'm sure you did too, that virtually turned your stomach. Yeah, but I've had a unique experience as a former elected official. I've had hundreds of people walk up to me on the street or at church or in the grocery store who are very concerned that our country may be falling apart. How can we blame them for worrying when they see the results of a pandemic? Something that our friend Bill Gates warned us about 3 or 4 years back, and something that is interesting to read in today's news, that he's doing some planning now and making sure that if we have another pandemic, we get through it a little better. But these folks on the street see children failing in school. They see parents who have no idea how to connect or interest a 3rd grader in Zoom to get connected to the teacher at school. They see hospitals that turn us away at the visitor's entrance, even though we have a spouse on the third floor or an ICU, and young people walking through our streets, breaking windows, burning cars and flags. I try to assure my friends and others that approach me that America will survive and come out of this as we have before. Anyone who knows a bit about history knows the story of the 1920 presidential election, an election following a world war that took thousands of American lives, and then a worldwide pandemic, the Spanish flu, that took even more, and then the rise of communism and the Russian Revolution and the threat of dominance of that new belief. And then on one Sunday morning in the American Midwest, more than 40 tornadoes in one day that took 380 lives. We were a very discouraged country. Then along comes a milquetoast to sort of a second stringer in the Republican Party. And that's how he was described by his counterparts. Warren G. Harding, who coined the phrase, return to normalcy. He barely left his front porch to campaign. Harding watched his opponents out barnstorming the country, but he knew that what the American people wanted, and he didn't say much more beyond a simple promise. And he won. His promise was, once again, return to normalcy. So why are we feeling so divided? Is it social media that's pulling us apart? Or perhaps is it more like the city mice versus the country mice? Or could it be television and choosing a channel to watch their perspective of our news? Or maybe it's religion for some folks. The divisions are growing, and they are geographical, they're ideological, and they're spiritual. As many studies have shown, when like-minded people gather, they tend to become more extreme. White evangelicals gave 87% of their vote to Donald Trump in 2016. And Hillary Clinton took more than 85% of the vote in San Francisco, Washington, D.C., and Manhattan. In a recent piece by David French in National Publications, he asserts that we need to go back to James Madison himself, who struggled with the violence of factions. How does a nation like ours deal with competing factions? Madison favored letting everyone have participation. Madison called for pluralism, and he advocated letting many different political flowers bloom. In other words, a broad diversity of interests and groups helps prevent any interest group from attaining a dangerous dominance. In Madison's words, the increased variety of parties comprised within the Union increases all of our security. Is this the answer? Frankly, I'm not entirely sure, but it sure deserves study and consideration. A second subject that I'm concerned about, that Americans are increasingly losing their faith in the government's ability to respond. I would guess today that 90% of my friends are angry and upset, mostly people my age, not knowing how to get a COVID vaccination. I only wish that Rotary would have been called upon in the very first. Surely this is much different than the vaccinations that we were doing in Africa, India, and beyond for polio. But there still is a role for Rotary in solving this problem. Our government leaders at the state and local level have no idea how big a job it is to vaccinate millions of people. Rotarians will soon be called on to assist, I hope, and we have made the suggestion at the highest levels. I don't know how many of you have been through the process yet. I have completed my second shot this past weekend in Tacoma. Pierce County had a whole cadre of volunteers helping, but no one at that point had called Rotary. Volunteers were lining up the cars, handing out the forms, collecting the completed forms, guiding us through the vaccination location. We should be helping with all these jobs. The local health departments are overwhelmed, and many people in our state don't realize that our local health departments have been underfunded for many, many years. And in small counties, they only have 1 or 2, maybe 3 employees. A third subject is distrust in our elections. More than 60% of the respondents recently told pollster Stu Elway that they didn't fully trust Washington state elections and weren't entirely sure if they were honest. Rather than attack the leaders that propagated this distrust, our Secretary of State was shocked, and so was I. I believe the Secretary of State, Kim Wyman, will soon be laying out a plan for all of us during the next few weeks on how she, county auditors, election officials, etc., can rebuild that trust. It's very, very important. And remember that we are a state where you can electronically track your ballot right into the counting room. Many states are not nearly so sophisticated. A fourth subject is an important one. Over the past few years, I've had many people ask me very simple questions about how the system works. What is the difference between the state Supreme Court and the federal Supreme Court? How does impeachment work? What is a veto? What are executive orders? I have received messages on Facebook and Instagram and emails that are widely circulated on social media, claiming that elected officials get paid a full salary for life, whether they win or lose, and other ridiculous claims of a similar nature. This entire country, our entire country, desperately needs a reintroduction of civics, not just a bit in high school, but we need to start in the 4th grade, and then the 8th grade, and then a serious program for high school kids. Our citizens have no idea of our government structure, who has what powers, and how legislation is developed or changed. 2 or 3 more brief subjects. First, the protesters downtown who are breaking windows, burning cars, and damaging our businesses. In my opinion, the minute that they are more than protesting and start to do damage, at that point, they need to go to jail and stay there for a while. These mini riots are not happening in 99% of American cities. The people involved are anti-everything lawbreakers, and they need to have consequences. The day before the election, they were anti-Trump. The day after the election, a group of them broke windows in Seattle downtown, shouting anti-Biden slogans. Our beautiful city's reputation is going down the drain with them. Think how many years that we have worked to make Seattle a popular destination, a city to visit and enjoy. Are we willing to lose all that? Secondly, the pandemic. During the next few weeks, we are hopeful of getting tens of thousands of Washingtonians fully vaccinated for COVID. It is time now to get the kids back into school and our businesses open again. If the teachers want to be vaccinated first, then give them the vaccine now. Make them a priority, but let's get our schools reopened. Many private schools in our state continue to operate daily with in-person classes. I've got grandkids in 3 of them. Kids are languishing at home, either struggling with Zoom or just totally ignoring attendance. It is one thing for a mom or dad in South Seattle to team up and take shifts and help the kids. But too often it's a single mom or dad who has to be at work to put food on the table. The child is home alone. And regarding the restaurants, it's time to open them up before we lose them all. If I go to Costco or Fred Meyer on a busy Saturday morning, there are people crowded around the meat department or the dairy case. Everyone is masked, and that's legal. But going to a restaurant where you have to sit 3 booths away from the next set of guests is illegal. I believe it's totally ridiculous. Finally, drugs, mental illness, and homelessness. And that was an excellent presentation made in the short program, I felt. To me, it doesn't make sense to build housing for homeless people unless we tackle drugs and mental illness first. The flow of drugs into our region continues to increase, and we need to work on finding solutions. Every corner of our streets has some sad-looking individual sitting on it begging for money. The experts tell me that many of them only want the necessary amount for a drug hit that day. Some areas of the state are way ahead on this subject with full cooperation of law enforcement, the court system, restorative care programs, and making people clean and productive again. Mental health programs are a key element. Expensive, yes, but they're very, very important. And then finally, if people are committed to change and have entered a program and have signed a contract to build a better life, it is then we provide housing. I'm afraid right now we are attacking the problem from the wrong end. If you think things are working well, and I looked into this and I wondered about these things, then look at the numbers. It's estimated we have about 12,000 homeless people in King County. And the budget projects for next year that we'll spend around $1 billion. You have a pencil and paper there in your desk. Run the division. It comes to just under $100,000 per homeless person each year. That means every time we drive by a homeless camp, that amount of your money is being spent on every single individual living there. Something to think about. In conclusion, our own participation. We were chosen and recruited to join Seattle Rotary number 4 because we are leaders, because we are stalwarts of the community, and because we solve problems. So each of us needs to ask ourselves this question. If you're at your desk, write down the answers for me. What is the name of my city council person? What is the name of my 3 legislators in Olympia? What is the name of my member of Congress? When is the last time I spoke directly with any of these people? Do these people know my views? I think you see where I'm headed. Rotarians, it is time we inserted ourselves into the process, invited or not. We need to be beneficial to all concerned. Thank you very much.
Ralph, as always, a breath of fresh air. Thank you for your honesty and your comments today. We've got lots of questions piling up and we've got tons of time. So let's start. Have you suggestions on how we can educate Americans in civics, including people who graduated from high school many years ago?
Well, I think you have to start where it's easiest to start, and that's in the public schools and the private schools. The legislature took a good step of a year or two ago and increased mandated a small program for civics. It's mandatory, but I think we've got to go beyond that. Secondly, all of our businesses and corporations are the major ones that you know, I guess this is 50 years ago, 40, 50 years ago, really did their best to educate the people that worked for them and their employees and so forth about civics. Boeing actually used to have classes to teach people how to run for the legislature. They had Republicans and Democrats all, but they taught them the basics. And you met off staffs, off of the job, and you learned about being involved in politics. I think there's a lot of ways that this could happen. But right now, and maybe it's just a basic civics continuous question and answer program that we operate through the press. But right now, I'm really discouraged that people just simply don't know a lot of the very basic stuff.
You think, Ralph, do you think, this is from me, do you think companies are too scared to do that? Is that too much like church and state? It's not their job, so why should they do it?
Well, I think companies better wake up that, you know, you can't dumb down the population. You better have a population that understands how our system works and how our government's supposed to work. You know, we're all in this together. And I don't know if you saw what the comments by Leon Panetta in the San Francisco Bay Area. You know, he's the most highly respected business Democrat, I think, in America. And he was saying, look, if California doesn't change, there won't be anybody left to pay the taxes. The people are, business corporations are moving out, period.
Yeah.
And so this is not just a fire alarm. This is a serious problem, and it's got to be addressed in one format or another. And by the way, a lot of my, I was introduced as a Republican. I probably got more Democratic votes than most Republicans who ever have, but my Democratic friends agree with me 1,000% on many of these issues.
Yeah, which makes them just issues, not a political issue. They're just issues, as you're saying. All right, next question. You mentioned the lack of funding for public health. What do you propose for fixing healthcare in the country, more specifically rural areas?
Well, I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know that, the counties have been squeezed more and more and more all across the state and across everywhere in America because of the cost of incarceration. And so the health department always seems to be on the losing end of that budget trail. And there's places in the health department in some counties only has 1, 2, 3 people. And suddenly they have a pandemic come along. And so it sounds to me like, just by what I briefly read this morning, that Microsoft and not Microsoft, but that Bill Gates and the foundation are working on some ideas for us to be looking at for the future. Because like he says, this could happen again, and it could happen again soon. So I'm hoping that includes the infrastructure that's needed at the local level.
All right. Washington has had tremendous success with accurate and safe mail-in voting. What causes resistance from other states to learn from us and implement similar programs?
Well, there's a lot of resistance to it. I think by the Republicans who believe that it's going to cause, huge increase in Democrats voting. I don't think that's true. And there was a lot of distrust in how it was carried out. I will say this, that, it took us almost 20 years to convert to voting by mail. Trying to convert to voting by mail in a few months was not a smart thing for a number of states to do. Luckily, they got through it, from what I can tell, pretty well. I haven't gone back to see what their reconciliation of ballots is and so forth, but obviously with a close presidential election, you've had that happen. But it's a gamble. And if you don't have the necessary scanning equipment and the necessary operations to scan every single signature, then you're making a mistake trying it. It's a huge job. But remember that these states that say they're going to roll it back and not happen, the public's not going to allow that. The public wants to vote more and more absentee. They're tired of standing in line to go vote. It's an archaic system for the way we live.
It does seem very archaic, doesn't it?
Oh, it's craziness.
That's funny.
Just
see pictures of, yeah.
See those lines of 500 people, 300 people standing in line to vote. It's are we living in Nigeria or Ghana?
Yeah, it looks like it. All right. Do you think the Rotary should be engaged at the national level in providing voter education to counter the disinformation that our citizens get through social media?
Well, I don't know about that, but I do think that Rotary can help us a lot with the civics question, and with the how the system works, and just the basic questions and answers. And that's something that we in Rotary clubs could be doing too. Is bringing in speakers to talk about that and to explain those things, because there's always pretty complicated questions. We've certainly rolled out an election that had every possible example of rights or wrongs, and so maybe we should prioritize who's on the podium this next few months or next couple of years to make sure we've got good people that can explain some of these issues to us.
Yeah, I get that. Do we need civics and basic economics in our high schools? Many young adults don't seem to really understand what socialism means.
I agree. But I think that comes out of a discussion of civics and, of course, history. And just look at the modern world. If you want to see what socialism means, take a flight to Venezuela. You know, these things are, kids aren't stupid. They're really smart. I volunteer at the schools here, and one of my most rewarding experiences is this last year I've started to mentor a high school young woman at the local high school here, single mom and not struggling, but she could be doing much better. And I spent a couple days a week with her this summer. She worked for me here in the farm, and we talked about issues and ideas and taught her how to drive the tractors and how to run equipment, but also talked a lot about both sides, political aisle, what, you know, where we're headed, books to read, these sort of things. You know, it sounds so simplistic, but if all of us took on one kid, we'd have a better world.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Here's a statement inside of a question, maybe, Ralph. Research shows the opposite. Housing first. Treatment won't be successful if folks aren't stabilized in safe, secure housing. Goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Comment?
They could be absolutely right. They could be. I'm just giving the perspective that I see from my point of view. I've watched here in Olympia what a drug court can do, and what I've seen so many law enforcement people say that, you know, there's no point in putting them in the house until you get a commitment that they really want their lives to change. And so however that formula works is fine by me, but it's very, very important. My perspective may be totally wrong, but if we don't do something about mental health and getting this drug flow slowed down or shoved, stopped. And that's not an easy job. I fully understand that.
You know, it seems like none of this is easy. I presume if it was easy, it would be done by now. That's my comment.
Yeah, that's probably right.
How do you restore faith in elections when one major candidate is pushing the big lie that the elections were stolen?
Well, you've got 74 million people that voted for that candidate. And you've got, 84 million people that on the other side. So the country's divided. We have to face that fact. And the only way to do that is part of the way to do that is educate the public on how elections work and how the election process works and what happens when your ballot goes in that drop box or in the mail or you voted, how it gets handled. How the observers observe the system. I think that too many states tried to rush into it this time, but that's a problem that will hopefully correct itself as time goes by.
Can I pick up on that though for a second? It's one, that sounds like an ad campaign. So who would run that campaign? And two, does it feel like we've become so skeptical in this country that even if that came from a solid source, right? Would we, half the country, I'll just say half just because, would we believe what we were seeing? Would that education even work? I'm not sure,
but you've got to keep pounding away at it. Do you know how many years we've worked to try to convince the American people that vaccines are safe? But we still keep pounding away at it. And we had that dilemma with the polio vaccine, and people say, well, it's all a fraud and nothing happens. Look at my Facebook page yesterday. I pointed out that we, something about how wonderful it was. We got the vaccine. People are starting to take it, get their second dose, first dose, second dose, and boy, there were 2 or 3 people jumped on there right away and told me that vaccines were worthless, and so we've got to counteract. People have forgotten about polio. They've forgotten about diphtheria. They've forgotten about whooping cough. They've forgotten about all these diseases that we used to have, and so it's all part of the problem.
Yeah, I think you're right, though. I think a lot of this comes back down to education. All right, next, we got room for like probably 2 more questions. Should we go back to imposing vagrancy laws with homeless camps and direct them to housing services and other services, but not allow them to camp on public property and parks?
I don't know. I don't know. We have the same situation here in Olympia, where they're mostly kept here on transportation right of ways, but some downtown. I'm not sure. Those guys that are working those camps every day can probably tell you better than I. A lot of those people out there are legitimate people who ran it out to the end of the line and couldn't make the rent or couldn't make whatever. But I'm saying, what I'm saying is the problems that we can deal with, let's deal with. Let's try to deal with the drugs. Let's try to deal with getting people back on their feet. Let's try to deal with people in a contract and agree to change their lives. Let's try to get people, and if stable housing first is the answer, then I won't argue with that. I'm not the expert on that subject.
Okay. All right, one last question. And then if you've got a chance after we're done, I would direct you to the chat. There's many great comments about you. Lots of good suggestions. Just a really good chatter going on. Less questions, just more chatter. But if you can, I would direct you over there. All right, last quick question. What would it take to put voter pamphlets information online?
I thought it was online now, but maybe it's not. Interestingly enough, a number of things about our elections are constitutional. And I believe that the voters pamphlet itself is constitutional. The earliest people that founded our state, when the populist movement came roaring through in the early 1900s, the voters pamphlet was something that passed in 1913, 1914, that people were worried that somebody was going to slip something by them, and they had reason for that distrust. And so they required, this pamphlet to be produced and sent out there. And I believe it says to every household. I can check that for you and find out, but I'm sure it could be put online as well. I will tell you that I learned my lesson on that is that if you make one mistake on page 43 or one comma missing on page 81, somebody's going to call you about it. And I think it's maybe one of the most well-read and appreciated documents that the state produces. But I don't know if it is. I don't think it is online maybe now, but if it could be, I'll have to ask Secretary of State Kim Wyman about that.
Okay. Hey, Ralph, we all miss you. Today had the largest amount of viewers we've had since going online. So you are apparently a lot of people's heroes, including mine. Thank you so much for being here today.
I hope it helps, and thank you. And thank you to all Seattle Rotary for what you do. And I hope this other 34% gets their money into the foundation, because I know that the foundation does wonderful things around the country. So thank you.